Polls in Iraq on October 10 are a major reaction to the protests that rocked the country in 2019. There's little evidence that the vote will make things better, but many are calling it an election that holds a key role to Iraq's future. With growing anti-government protests in the country and the United Nations team that will monitor the elections, what will this mean for Baghdad?
War-scarred Iraq is all set for elections next week. But for the citizens of the country, the polls have become more about politicians and less about the change they will bring in. Iraq is emerging out of 2 decades of war. The country has experienced insurgency since the US-led invasion toppled dictator Saddam Hussein. This was followed by a brutal war to fight off the Islamic State. It ended in 2017, but was followed up by years of corruption and conflict. In the last 2 years, protests against the ruling elite have rocked the war-torn nation, killing hundreds. The polls were initially scheduled for 2022. They were earlier moved forward to June this year, but later postponed to October. The early polls were a concession to the anti-government protests. Nearly 25 million Iraqis are eligible to vote. They will elect 239 lawmakers from more than 3,200 candidates in 83 constituencies. A 25% quota is reserved for women in the Council of Representatives. Although parliamentary polls are being held early, there is little hope for major change. The reason for this is widespread disillusionment. The people of Iraq view the political class as inept and corrupt. Most of them don't even want to vote. Fears are that the voter turnout could drop below the official 44.5% in 2018.
Most people have a feeling of despair regarding the elections, despite their demand for an early election. However, they feel that the situation before these elections is not what they had asked for. It doesn't feel safe, and the activists feel that they may be killed, arrested, or even unable to participate in the elections the way they wanted to.
Some politicians say that Iraq is moving forward. The election is being held 6 months early. There is a new law to help independent candidates. Violent sectarianism is less of a feature, and security is better than it has been for years. For some citizens, this is not the reality. The polls are a contest, dominated by groups, especially those that control state bodies and resources. Many say that the political factions are the same since 2003. The only thing that has changed are the faces.
There are problems in the country that make elections undemocratic, such as weapons outside the control of the state. There will be no transparent elections, and I do not want to be complicit in this crime. I consider this election a crime. We do not know what the solution is because all the roads are blocked.
Shiite majority groups are expected to remain in power. This has been the case in the war-torn nation since Saddam Hussein's Sunni-led regime was removed from power. But the Shiites are also sharply divided. The reason is Iran's growing influence. Shiite groups backed by Iran are facing off at the polls against other Shiite groups that oppose Iran's influence. Activists who took to the streets during the protests are also split among themselves. While some are boycotting the election, others are taking part.
If we know that continuing to protest would bring the current system down, we would continue to protest. We are protesting peacefully, we don't mind. But when we protested, they killed us, arrested us, and maliciously charged us. How do we achieve change? We need to be present at decision-making levels.
Popular resentment over corruption and lack of public services is pushing more and more Iraqis to migrate to the West. While the 2019 protests led the previous government to quit, little else has changed since then. The elections are taking place at a time in Iraq when politicians, groups and communities are more fractured than ever. This vote's aftermath will set the tone for the coming years. Will the country usher in a new ruling class, or will the same political groups wield power in the war-torn nation? West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.